Now, D, this kind of goes into point A for me. Reiner. I understood that he was gung-ho for the mission, but I mainly saw it in terms of family esteem and making his mother happy, and being seen as a hero. But he really was a true believer in this idea that the Eldians of Paradis were evil, and were a major threat to both the Eldians of Marley and the world as a whole. And I think I realized something here. He had this question of why things had turned out the way that they had. He became a warrior when he wasn't really supposed to, then Marcel died, and he ended up in charge and having to more or less improvise. That thing about saving the world ended up becoming his answer and his explanation for why they had ended up here. But then, this other side developed where he increasingly saw that the beliefs he had clung to all this time, ideas instilled by Marley and by Karina herself, were wrong. But that had been what he could cling to. So you see that rift happening, and then on a personal note, he really did start to become fond of and develop attachments to his comrades, whom he would later betray. And then the thing is, he ultimately failed in his mission anyways. So after all of that, he fails the mission and realizes it was probably the wrong mission to begin with. So after all of that pure hell, he's left with the question of what the point even was this whole time. The point of his very life, really. And now he's already about to die in a couple of years after all of that. Which makes me think of Annie. She was like, we already have limited time to even live, and you want us to spend it playing soldier. And it's funny. Reiner, Eren, and Falco all had that line about not wanting to die without having accomplished anything in their lives. And Reiner actually heard Falco saying as much right when he was about to pull the trigger. So I guess that especially stirred something for him. Those kids still need his protection and work. Heck, maybe he even feels that if he can have Falco be the next inheritor, he will have finally accomplished something worthwhile in his own life. There's probably some stuff I'm leaving out here still, especially since I am tired as heck, but I think I've covered enough. There are also some really, really good insights that I'd like to share here from other viewers. First of all, there's the grasshoppers we saw Annie crush underfoot during training. From comments I've read, there's a fair bit of symbolism here with the grasshopper Annie crushed. It seems there are two main things in particular. The first is that grasshoppers are considered good luck, so if she killed it deliberately, that could either indicate her disdain for the idea of luck, or for the mission itself. And there's a particular irony in the fact that Annie herself later ended up trapped inside that crystal, like a dormant or developing insect inside its cocoon. And whether it's deliberate or accidental, the grasshopper's death, in its context as a good luck symbol, could also be referenced to the fact that the mission went so horribly wrong from the very beginning. Marcel, the fact that Reiner shouldn't even have been chosen, and so on. And secondarily, the grasshopper symbolizes exclusively moving forward, or not retreating, because of how the insect itself moves. And that relentless push onwards is a huge theme for both Reiner and Eren, but especially Eren, I'd say. There's also how the grasshoppers are to humans as humans are to titans, like the scale and power dynamic. Think of how people talk about crushing enemies underfoot like they're mere insects. Also, grasshoppers/locusts are scripturally, biblically, associated with divine judgment and punishment. And lastly, this is mainly just really dark humor from fans, I think. Though then again, Isayama does have a dark sense of humor himself. But folks have also compared the grasshopper to the fate Petra specifically suffered at Annie's hands later on, though she isn't the only one who is crushed underfoot by Annie. Speak of Bertolt. That whole thing with Bertolt's odd sleeping positions and how the team would jokingly use them to predict the weather, that much I had already recognized as a reference from prior seasons, and it brought a big smile to my face. But other fans made a pretty amazing catch here. In this episode, we find out that Bertolt's restless sleep comes from the nightmares he's having, likely as a result of his guilt. He even has nightmares about that specific guy whom they had stolen the story from. And guess what? The sleeping position we see from Bertolt in this episode, legs upward with his arms folded behind his back like that, actually matches the tarot card known as the Hanged Man. Dude. So the guy hangs himself and Bertolt is haunted by thoughts of him and actually ends up in the pose of the Hanged Man. It's not about whether or not you follow tarot cards here, it's just that this is such a cool, subtle reference and it was very impressive how people caught it. And I realized personally that it's like there's a sort of dark humor there from the universe where it's like, okay, Bertolt, you wanted to take this guy's story and insert yourself in there. You want to impersonate him, right? You wanted to be in his position, right? Well then, you can semi-literally end up in his position in a physical sense now. You are in the position of the Hanged Man. And someone else pointed out the irony of how this fun, humorous thing for the other recruits, this game of predicting the weather, turns out to have such a dark reality behind it for Bertolt himself. Oh, and I almost forgot, but it was also explained that this particular card represents a variety of things. Upright, it can mean pause, surrender, letting go, and new perspectives. Reversed, it means delays, resistance, stalling, indecision, egotism, inability to change, and missing an opportunity. One quote says, "The Hanged Man is the card of ultimate surrender, of being suspended in time and of martyrdom and sacrifice to the greater good." But then on the other hand, the card itself depicts a punishment of traitors, and some versions actually depict Judas himself. I think just about everything I mentioned, both positive and negative, can be applied to the story of Bertolt, Reiner, and the crew, yes? Moving onwards, it turns out there's also a great link between the men who committed suicide and Reiner himself. When it was revealed that the man had killed himself, and then it flashed over to Reiner, it probably wasn't meant to imply that Reiner had anything to do with this death. Instead, they're showing Reiner's face because of this key question he has. Why this guy told him this story and then proceeded to go off himself anyways. And Reiner comes to understand this over time as he accumulates guilt. It's about unburdening, in a sense. It reminds me of that Nickelback line, "Doctor, can you be my priest?" Just like the man wanted to tell that story of how he abandoned 3 children the same age as Reiner. That's yet another huge sort of parallel, or foreshadowing by the way, since Reiner lost all 3 of his teammates and was the lone one to survive and escape. But just like that man, Reiner now wants his sins to be known. He's not only haunted by what he's done, but also haunted by the fact that people don't know the things he's done. Before he dies, he wants to be judged by people who know the blood on his hands. It actually reminds me a bit of Itachi Uchiha, come to think of it. And in Reiner's case, the fact that folks actually admire and praise him for his actions probably sickens him all the more. And understanding all of this really helped me to understand certain ways that Reiner behaves later on that I'm aware of but had been puzzled by. He insists on saying and revealing certain things, and it seems reckless of him, but I now realize that he wanted to get the stuff off his chest. He wanted people to know how horrible he is, or at least considers himself to be. It's arguable that at least some of his guilt is undeserved, though some of it also is. And the burning himself isn't even a simple thing, if you think back to what I brought up with episode 2, regarding how the mission itself and the truth about Paradise in general both seem to be classified information under Marley's policies. Disclosing classified info to someone, especially a fellow Eldian, would put their future and life in danger. So whom the heck was he going to tell? By the way, regarding why he'd actually tried to take his life at all, I just thought it was a result of his general PTSD and mental issues, but someone else made a suggestion that I think is better and explains the sudden timing. He didn't want to go back to Paradise. Having to fight against his former comrades had been hell, the one big serious part in his sarcastic dinner time story from episode 2. Plus, we've seen what he already went through there with his team. At the end of episode 2, he was asking if he'd have to go back to that island, and between the horrible memories of the place, how painful it would be again facing off against the people he betrayed, and the fact that he now realizes he was lied to, and the mission itself was a BS one to persecute and slaughter innocent people, Reiner decided he'd literally rather die than return to Paradise for that new mission to again try reclaiming the Founder. And actually, committing suicide would have also been a way of ensuring that Gabby didn't get the Titan herself, at least not right away. But hearing Falco say the same thing that Reiner and Eren had both said as young men brought him back and reminded him that these kids still needed him. Okay, the final 2 insights here are quick. First is that Colt, Falco's older brother, may be actually doing to Gabby what Marcel did to Reiner all those years ago. Heck, maybe Reiner even notices this. Remember that scene on the train? It could be that Colt wasn't just hyping Gabby up out of sincere gratitude, although he was drunk at the time. But maybe he was also hyping her up in hopes of ensuring that she would be chosen for the warrior position rather than Falco. Man, if Reiner recognized or suspected that just gives an extra reason for how cranky he already looked in that scene, aside from the irritation caused by the problem itself. The other big insight is this. There's a particular scene where we see a tree and its shadow near a character, and this is something that wasn't present in the manga version of that scene. That may seem like a super minor and purely aesthetic detail here, but remember what I said in my trailer reactions about that Tree of Life motif? I also noted how this series uses super subtle details and sprinkles symbolism all throughout this show. That new example I now have regarding the tarot card perfectly showcases that. So it's really not reaching to think that they added that detail for a purpose here, especially since we do know that they've already added additional foreshadowing in the anime that hadn't been present in the manga. It's just great. And a wee bit chilling, but it really does go from a cool little shot to a magnificent one when you have that additional context.